What's up, y'all? Today I'll be showing you how to be the hero of the picnic this summer with this big and large sandwich. Am I making a muffaletta? Yeah, kind of, but I'll be doing a few non-muffaletta-like things, so I'm a little hesitant to call it that. Let's just say it's muffaletta inspired. This is more of a technique guide than a literal recipe, since you can put whatever you want on this, but if you follow the assembly guide, you'll have something that gets even better after you wrap it up and take it to the park with you. So let's jump right into it. It all starts with the bread, and today we're making our own. I'm going to do a quick cast iron skillet focaccia today. It's pretty easy, so it makes for a great beginner bread. It's the perfect shape and size for a sandwich shareable between 4 to 6 people, and focaccia has the added benefit of containing a bunch of olive oil, so it stays moist even without a bunch of mayo that could sog it out. So into my stand mixer bowl, I'll measure out 340 grams of bread flour, about 3 grams of active dry yeast, 5 grams of sugar, 9 grams of salt, 20 grams of olive oil, and 270 grams of lukewarm water. That goes onto the mixer with the dough hook attachment, and I'll work that just until there's no dry flour remaining. I use the stand mixer for this, but in hindsight, this dough is wet enough to where it probably would have been easier and quicker to just mix it by hand. Either way, once it's thoroughly combined, I'll scrape the inside of the bowl down and cover to let this start rising. Now, this is almost a no-knead dough, but for those, normally I would let them rise on the counter overnight to develop all the necessary gluten. I don't have that kind of time today, so I'll help it along just a little bit. This has been rising for about 20 minutes now, and I'll give it one strength-building fold. To do that, I will first wet my hands so I don't stick, and then I'll go around the edges of the dough, grabbing a little bit of it at a time, pulling it up as far as I can without tearing it, and then laying it back down over the rest of the dough. I'll go around the whole perimeter repeating this move about 5 or 6 times, re-wetting my hand whenever things start to get too sticky. Once that's done, I'll try and collect this all into a smooth round with a taut surface, although you could probably skip that, and then I'll let this rise on the counter for another 3 or 4 hours. So here's my dough. I think about 4 hours later. You can see it's risen a bunch and it's really slack again. I'm ready to put this into my pan now, so first I will very generously coat my 10-inch cast iron with olive oil. It's probably worth noting that I've scaled the dough recipe to fit this size pan, so you can scale it up or down depending on how big your pan is. I'm using probably close to 1/3 of a cup of oil, and I'll make sure to work that up the sides as well to get a good non-stick surface. Then I'll use a little bit of this oil to lube up my hands and get my dough out onto the counter. I want to try and get a tight-ish skin on this just so it'll hold on to more CO2 that's produced in the final rise, and so it rises relatively evenly. Once it's in the pan, I'll pat this out with my fingertips to start spreading it out. The gluten may be too tense at this point to get it edge to edge, but that's okay. I'll get it as far as I can and then let it rest for 10 or 15 minutes and then come back to it. As I come back to it here, you can see it's much more relaxed and easier to get it to spread out all the way. Once that's done, I'll finish this with a little more salt. I'd use a big flaky salt for this if I remembered to buy some, but looks like it's going to be regular kosher for me today. Then I'll cover that back up and let it do its final rise, about an hour or until it doubles in size. About an hour later, this looks ready to bake, so I'll throw it into the center of a 500-degree Fahrenheit oven for about 18 minutes. 18 minutes later, and this is what we got. A little blonde. You get better color if you let it ferment longer, but that's okay. This was relatively quick, and it's still going to taste great. I'll slide that out onto a cooling rack to come all the way down to room temperature before I cut into it. In the meanwhile, I'll make my olive salad. I don't want to be too prescriptivist with this. The main goal is to make something really bright, herbal, and acidic to balance out all the richness with the rest of the sandwich. I've got around a cup of olives here, and I'm doing a 50-50 mix of kalamatas and castelvetranos. Once I get all those pitted, I'll chop them into a rough mince. You really don't need to be precious about this, just break them down until there are no chunks bigger than about a quarter olive. Next, I'll do some parsley for some herbiness. Really, any tender herb would work here. Cilantro, basil, mint, dill, they'd all be good, so go crazy. Next, I have this red bell pepper. This will add some sweetness and juiciness, which will play well with the brininess of the kalamata olives. I'll mince up half of this and throw it in. Then I'll do some shallot. This one's pretty big, so I'll just do half of that as well. I like shallot here because it's a little milder than a red onion and has a slightly more complex allium flavor that won't compete as much with the other flavors. Then I have some calabrian chilies for a little heat. I ended up adding 4 of those. And then finally, I'll dress this with a couple tablespoons of champagne vinegar, about a teaspoon of Dijon mustard, salt, and pepper. I made this with what I had and what I like, but again, there's an infinite number of iterations on this. I would say the must-haves are olives, an herb, and something oniony, but once you cover those bases, the sky's the limit. To me, this is perfect. Real punchy in a way that you can really feel in the back of your jaw. It'll complement the rest of the sandwich beautifully. Speaking of which, my bread is cooled down now, so it's time to build this thing. I'll start by cutting this guy in half, and here you can get a good look at the crumb structure. Very soft and fluffy, nice. On the bottom half, I'll start layering my meats. I like a single thin layer of each of my meats, so I'll start with ham. I'm trying to match the curvature of the ham to the curvature of the bread there, then I'll use some scraps to fill in the gaps. Next, I'll go with a layer of Genoa salami, followed by this salami picante. Other great choices here would be mortadella, prosciutto, capicola, things of that nature. Now for the top half, I'll do the cheese. I'm going to do a mix of havarti and provolone today. Provolone would be the more classic choice, but havarti has a little bit more flavor and it melts really well, so I like the combo. Just like the meats, I'll do a single layer of each of the cheeses. Now, these two halves are going to go into a 425 degree Fahrenheit oven for just a few minutes, not really trying to brown anything, but long enough for the cheese to melt and for the meats to soften up and release some of their fat. And in addition to the olive salad coming later, I do like a little extra acidity in the form of dill pickles, so I'll slice up a couple of those as well. After a couple minutes, my cheese is melty and my meat is glistening, so these are ready to come out of the oven. To finish building this, I'll take the bottom half and scatter on my pickle slices, and then on goes my olive salad, and then the top half of the bread. I'll give that a little press to give the cheese a chance to adhere, and with that, this sandwich is done. I'm going to cut this into 4 big portions today, but you could easily serve 6 with this. There's a good look at the cross section. Now let's go in for the taste test. The first thing you get is the crustiness of the bread, followed by that tender, pillowy interior. Then as for the contents of the sandwich, it's got really every flavor and texture you could ever want. Melty cheese, lots of cured meats, and those pickles and salad to brighten everything up. This is such a perfect make-ahead sandwich because there are so many safeguards that will prevent the bread from getting soggy. For one, the bread has enough olive oil in it that you really don't need mayo or other condiments to keep it from being dry. And with this layering strategy, the meat and cheese prevent any of the moisture from the salad seeping into the bread. So as good as this is nice and warm now, and it is very, very good, I'll wrap the rest of these portions in foil and put them in the fridge, and they'll be even better tomorrow. So I hope you make this sometime and take it along for your next park day or beach day. If you do, let me know how it goes. Thanks.